Good evening. Welcome to Birkbeck, University of London, and welcome to Business Week, which is our annual showcase of research taking place in the School of Business, Economics and Informatics. Each day culminates with a keynote lecture, and to introduce our speaker, I'm delighted to welcome to the podium the Master of Birkbeck, Professor David Lashman.
It's my great privilege to introduce this Lord Marshall Memorial Lecture and to welcome you to the college, and a particular welcome, of course, to Lady Marshall and Anna, her daughter, who we're delighted to have with us at this event. And of course, the bare facts are there that Colin was, from 2003 to 2010, the chairman of governors of Birkbeck. And even for that alone, it's entirely appropriate that we commemorate him in an annual memorial lecture. But of course, those of you who know Colin know that Colin was not simply a chairman who was a chairman that acted the part and failed to get deeply involved in the organisation. And we know at Birkbeck how much we owe to him, to his guidance, to the way that, I was reflecting this morning, that he brought into the college a number of donors who have become significant friends of the college. Certainly to me personally, and I know those who have had that experience will know there could be no finer chairman than Colin in terms of relationships with the chief executive, in terms of all the activities of the chairman. Every governing body, everybody felt that they had said what they had to say, and the meeting finished at exactly the time that Colin intended to leave from the first moment that the meeting started. You could not, as a chief executive, want for a better chairman. I think I can introduce that by saying that when we were looking for Colin's successor, I met with somebody, a self-made man, a peer of the realm, and I told him about the duties of the chairman, and he said to me, "David, I could come 3 days a week. Don't tell me the good news, just tell me the bad news so I can deal with it." That, of course, as a chief executive, is not really how you want your chairman to behave. What you want is a chairman like Colin, who is always there, who is always supportive, and yet knows the difference between a chairman and a chief executive. And Colin was absolutely that. And I know that those of you who knew him know exactly what I mean. Of course, Colin was entirely fitted for the chairmanship of Birkbeck. His interest in London, his involvement in London First, in the setting up of the London Development Agency. He was, above all, a Londoner. He was also somebody who, although he left school at 16, felt passionately about the need for university education. So even though he had a tremendously successful career, he wanted others to have the experience that he lacked and to benefit from the university education. We all know the details of his career, and particularly his key role in British Airways. And so it is entirely appropriate that the first Lord Marshall Memorial Lecture is delivered by Willie Walsh, who has had such a tremendous career in the aviation industry, turning round Aer Lingus in the disastrous times after 9/11, coming to British Airways and steering it through the recession, leading the links with Iberia into now the International Airlines Group. And I don't think there could be anybody more appropriate to deliver our first Lord Marshall Memorial Lecture, and it's therefore my delight to introduce Willie Walsh to you and to invite him to give the first Lord Marshall Memorial Lecture.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction. It is a great honour for me to have been asked to deliver this lecture. When I was first approached, I honestly felt that I was not the right person to do this, because many of you know Lord Marshall, know Colin and know him well, and I feel truly honoured to have this opportunity this evening. It's great to see so many of his friends here this evening. It's great to see Lady Marshall here. We had a brief chat outside, and I'm delighted that she has joined us. Colin was an inspirational leader. When I meet people in British Airways who worked with Colin, heard of Colin, heard of people who had heard of Colin, the one thing they all say about him is how fantastic a people person he was. I don't use this term lightly, but he was loved by people in British Airways and still is loved and missed by people in British Airways. And as such, he was an incredibly difficult leader to follow. So I don't think anybody will be loved as much as Colin in any business anywhere. But it is a great honour to have this opportunity to talk to you. I know a lot about the airline industry, but I don't think I'll ever know as much as Colin knew, and I certainly don't expect to achieve anything close to what Colin achieved in his great career. But it's a great honour for me, as I said, to present this lecture this evening, and I hope you enjoy it. Now, there is a famous quotation from a professor of linguistics, and I'm always reminded of it when I'm in a lecture theatre, who pointed out to his students on the first day of term that it was common in most languages for a double negative to make a positive. But there was no known language in the world where a double positive made a negative, until the Irish man at the back said, "Yeah, right." I'm going to come back to that later on. Now, you know a lot about British Airways. You might not know as much about International Airlines Group. International Airlines Group was created in 2011, early 2011, with the merger of British Airways and Iberia. We've since gone on to acquire two airlines, BMI last year, which we've integrated into British Airways, and recently we've acquired 91% of the shares in a Spanish low-cost airline called Vueling. You can see how it's spelt there. You're forgiven. You can pronounce it any way you like, because I've heard more pronunciations of the name of the company than any other in my career. We're a Spanish registered company, but we run the business here from London, and we're listed on the London Stock Exchange and the Spanish stock exchanges. And you can see some of the figures. We're a 20 billion euro turnover. ASKs, that's the term we use in the industry to describe the capacity. So that's very significant, 236 billion, 70 million passengers, 230 destinations, and 420 aircraft. Now, our objective is to display leadership in our hubs, and today that's Heathrow, Madrid, and Barcelona. Leadership across the Atlantic, and we are the number one group across the North and South Atlantic. We set out to strengthen our position to Asia, which we believe will be a fantastic market. We're relatively light there, as I'll show in a moment. We also believe that Africa will be one of the most significant growth markets going forward. We have a significant intra-European network, which has been enhanced by the acquisition of Vueling. And clearly, in any industry, your cost has got to be competitive. So our vision is as a multinational, multi-brand organization. And we have benefited from others going ahead of us in terms of consolidation. We've learned from some of the mistakes they've made, and we've learned from some of the things they did well. And even simple things like our name, International Airlines Group. We avoided the temptation of using a combination of British Airways and Iberia in the name, unlike Air France-KLM. And the reason we did that is we believe that consolidation is going to be beneficial for the industry, and we want to pursue further consolidation. And with the case of Air France-KLM, if they acquire another airline, you start adding to the name of the company. So we avoided that by picking a very bland, simple name. We also were very clear that IAG is not a brand. The brand is British Airways. The brand is Iberia. The brand is Vueling. So we are not a brand. When we chose the name, we kicked anybody who had any marketing experience out of the room because we knew there would be a temptation to try and create something snazzy that could be used as the future brand. And we even kept the logo very simple until I left for a couple of days and came back, and they had inserted this airplane tail in the A there. The colours, as you can see, are pretty bland. So we're very clear. We're not trying to create a new brand. We're trying to create a group under which a number of different brands can reside. Just to give you an idea of our geographic spread, you can see here that this measures our capacity. You can see there that our domestic and European, what would be traditionally called short haul, is a very small part of our capacity, about 26%. So we're primarily a long haul carrier operating very strong position on the North transatlantic and into South America. And you can see there we're only 9% of our capacity in Asia Pacific. We're pretty light in that area. So that's an area of focus for us, as I mentioned earlier on, because clearly that is one of the significant growth markets in the world. Now, just to talk a little bit about the airline industry. It's a tough industry. It's gone through many challenges, more than most industries. Colin faced quite a lot of those when he was both CEO and chairman of British Airways. And you can see, interestingly, that we're challenged by high oil prices, which has been a feature of recent years. You can see the spike there in 2008 when oil prices hit nearly $150 a barrel. But interestingly, our industry is probably more aligned and more closely linked to international trade than it is to GDP. Normally, we talk about the link between GDP and the airline industry, and that airline growth is a multiple of GDP. But you can get a lot of GDP growth that actually won't benefit the airline industry. So domestic infrastructure investment will typically not have a follow through into air passengers. So it's more closely aligned to industrial production and industrial trade than global GDP. And one very interesting development for those of you who are interested in the economics of the industry is a significant split that has taken place between passenger. So the red line is what we call revenue passenger kilometres. So that's a measure of, if you like, the number of people who are flying globally. And the blue line is freight ton kilometres. Now, traditionally, they were very closely aligned, and freight was always seen as a leading indicator of global recession. So when we saw a fall off in air freight, it typically gave us a warning of a slowdown in global economies. And you can see what happened there following the collapse of Lehman's in 2008 and the subsequent global recession. The amount of trade being done through air cargo fell off a cliff. That has recovered, but we've seen a break in the link between freight and air passenger, and I think that's primarily because of a shift in the global economies, where we're seeing much more growth in emerging markets than we have seen in the traditional stable markets. And that's going to be on a chart that I will show you here. Now, as we've seen, we've had a close alignment between the air transport business and business confidence. And the industry performance peaked in 2010 at the same time as the confidence in the business and confidence in trade peaked. And you can see there the peak in air freight as well. We've seen a couple of false dawns in 2011 and early 2012, and they were primarily confidence coming back into the market about a resolution of the Eurozone crisis, only to be dashed when people realised the Eurozone had not resolved its issues. And that's probably best demonstrated by this chart, which shows business confidence on the red line there, and the bond spread between the Spanish bond and the German bond, the 10-year bond. And you can see as the spread widened, it tended to very much align itself with confidence. As the bond spread narrowed, confidence was improving. So confidence was improving as the bond spread moved. And we've seen the bond spread widen there again in 2012. It has narrowed significantly. It's at about 300 points, I think 302 points today. So we're seeing an improving situation in terms of that. So very close alignment between the situation in the Eurozone and confidence in business. And as I said, our industry is very much driven off the back of international business confidence. This, I think, is a fascinating chart because it shows the development of emerging economies and the advanced economies and the recovery that we've seen in the emerging economies, where it's about 20% higher than the peak prior to the global recession. So you can see all economies were impacted by the recession in 2009, but that the emerging economies have recovered at a significant pace and are well above where they were in their previous peak. Whereas in the advanced economies, we're still about 7% below where we were at the peak. And as a result, you've seen quite a divergence in performance between airlines that have a strong presence in emerging economies. I think using that term emerging economies is probably an insult to some of the economies that we typically talk about, because these are very significant economies in their own right. But we have seen a very big change in the nature of air transport globally, with a lot of growth happening in Asia in particular and in Africa. And this is benefiting carriers that are located in the Gulf region, who have significant hubs that can feed traffic into Asia and into Africa. And that's been one of the great successes, I think, of the Middle East carriers in recent times. Heathrow is the busiest international airport in the world. It's not the busiest airport in the world, that's Atlanta, but it's the busiest international airport in the world. In 2001, 2002, the hub at Dubai ranked number 99 in the world. Last year, 2012, Heathrow was number one. Heathrow was number one in 2001, 2002. Dubai had moved from number 99 in the world to number 2. And Dubai will probably overtake Heathrow as the busiest international airport in the world this year, certainly by next year. So you've seen an incredible boom in traffic going over the Middle East hubs. And it's not just Dubai, it's Abu Dhabi and Doha in Qatar as well. And geographically, they're probably better positioned to connect east to west, so to tap into the growth that's happening in the emerging markets. The good thing, however, is we have seen structural change in our industry. And for those of you who have looked at the past performance of the airline industry as an indicator of what might happen in the future, I think there has been a significant structural change. And therefore, I would encourage people who are interested in the economics of the airline business really to stop looking much beyond our past 2008, because I personally believe that has been a big change in the structure of the airline industry. And just to indicate it, this slide shows the price of jet fuel in 2006-07 and world GDP. So jet fuel was $82 a barrel and GDP was around 4%. And then 2012, jet fuel was $130 a barrel, GDP was 2.1. We can see the profitability of the industry is almost the same in 2012 as it was in 2006, despite the fact that we've seen a very significant increase in the oil price and a weakening in global GDP. And that's better shown on this. Now, I apologize, there's a lot on this, but I was asked to leave a copy of this. So those of you who are interested in aviation economics, there will be a copy available for you. And I just want to concentrate on that issue that I mentioned earlier, which is the fuel price and fuel as a percentage of the airline's cost base. And you can see there I've gone back to 2003 for this one. In 2003, the average price of a barrel of oil was just under $29 US, $28.80. The combined cost of fuel for the airline industry was $44 billion US. It represented about 14% of the industry's cost base. And in 2003, the industry made a net loss of $7.5 billion US. So oil price just under $30, 14% of the cost base of an airline, and a loss of $7.5 billion. There you see it, 7.5 billion. Now, if we move forward to 2012, this is a current estimate because they're updating the profitability, but the only figure that's likely to change is this one down here. But you can see now that the average price of a barrel of oil in 2012 was just under $112 a barrel, $111.80. It represented 32% of the industry's cost base and had risen in total to over $210 billion US, the bill for the industry. And yet, the industry managed to make a net profit of $7.6 billion US. That is a really significant structural change. So what it shows is that this is an industry that can adapt to changes in the oil price. It takes us a bit of time to adapt, but this is an industry that can be profitable at high oil prices. Now, if you had asked me 10 years ago if this was an industry that could survive with oil prices over $100 a barrel, I would have said absolutely not. What it has shown, however, is that structurally the industry is capable of adapting to these. Where we struggle is to adapt to the volatility in the oil price, but over time we can actually recover. So you've gone from 2003 there at 44 billion to 210 billion in 2012, an increase of $176 billion in cost for the industry. And it shows what the industry has had to do to adapt to that. So we've had to address our non-fuel costs. We've had to become more efficient. And unfortunately for you as consumers, it's meant that there has been an increase in the prices that you pay as well. But structurally, that's one of the most significant changes that this industry has seen. We're not yet at a level that would, if you wanted to look at this dispassionately, justify investment in the industry, because we're still not generating returns that cover our cost of capital. I believe that that has changed. I believe that going forward, this is an industry that will be able to exceed its cost of capital, because we've got a big change in the leadership in the industry, and we've also seen significant consolidation. Consolidation was one of the things that Colin argued for. He believed that artificial restrictions that prevented us from merging as airlines needed to be removed. And while some of those restrictions have been removed, not all of them have. But we've seen consolidation in a number of areas of the world. So within Europe, there's been good consolidation within the US. And probably the most significant development has been in the US market, where today there are 5 carriers with 85% of the domestic capacity, soon to be 4 carriers with the merger of American and US airlines. Only 5-6 years ago, that was 10 carriers. So we've seen significant consolidation there. Consolidation has led to more rational behavior. It's also led to an improvement in the performance of the industry, and the industry is now making profits for the first time in a long time, still shy of what it needs to do in terms of return. Now I want to turn to some of the challenges we face. Colin was a great person for encouraging government to stay out of our way, and I wish he was still around to do that, because unfortunately we still have quite a bit of interference. And I want to highlight some of the challenges that face us as an industry here in the UK that are unlike some of the challenges that are facing airlines in the rest of the world. This is from the Coalition's Programme for Government. I read it all the time. I'm sure everybody here has read it. It's a fascinating document, and section 30 of the Programme for Government deals with transport. And this is the statement. Government believes a modern transport infrastructure is essential for a dynamic and entrepreneurial economy, as well as to improve well-being and quality of life. We need to make transport greener and more sustainable with tougher emission standards and support for new transport technologies. I don't think there's anybody who would disagree with that statement. The interesting thing about the Programme for Government in section 30 that deals with transport is there's absolutely no mention of aviation in the government's policy. Where aviation does get mentioned, as some of you might expect, is in section 10, which deals with energy and climate change. And here it says the government believes that climate change is one of the gravest threats we face, and that urgent action at home and abroad is required. And I agree with that. I am not a scientist, but I've seen enough to tell me that CO2 is a threat, and whatever we can do to improve our performance in terms of emissions will have a long-term benefit, and anything we can do to reduce our CO2 emissions will have a positive impact going forward. But the government's answer to this was to cancel the 3rd runway at Heathrow and to refuse permission for additional runways at Gatwick and Stansted. And as you know, the Conservative Party campaigned on the basis of that. So the question that I often ask people, and that I have been asked myself, is will the cancellation of the 3rd runway make a difference to global climate change? And the answer is, yeah, right. Because the clue is in the name. It's a global issue. Global climate change is a global issue. And it doesn't matter in terms of CO2 if it's emitted here in the UK, in London, anywhere in the UK, in India or China. What matters is the amount of CO2 that's been emitted globally. And since we cancelled the building of a 3rd runway, China has built 45 new airports. Airports, not runways. Some of these will have 9 runways. In fact, the new Beijing International airport that has recently been approved is intended to have 9 runways. It'll open with 6 runways in 2018. So since I entered the debate around a 3rd runway in the UK, China has built over 45 and plans to build another 52 before the end of this decade. So not building a runway here, you could argue, will be an improvement in terms of emissions in the UK, but all you're doing is you're transferring that activity out of the UK into other parts of the world. So hub airports in Europe, in Amsterdam, Paris, Frankfurt, are saying thank you very much. And the interesting thing about this is if you don't stop the flying, you can actually end up in a perverse situation where you're increasing the amount of CO2 emitted because you're forcing people to travel over an intermediate point that actually adds to the distance. And what is interesting is if you want to fly from the UK to some of these emerging markets in Asia, a lot of people see traveling over the Middle East hubs as an opportunity, and therefore we don't need the runway capacity here. We started flying to Seoul in Korea in December of last year. The distance that you would need to travel if you flew over a Middle East point to get to Seoul rather than fly direct from London is almost 50% longer. Because sometimes what people forget is the world is not flat. You know, we live on a globe, and the shortest point between 2 places on the globe is what we call the Great Circle, and the Great Circle distance is the distance that matters. So when you take off to fly to Asia, you're not flying as you might think, going south or southeast. The quickest way there is over the North Pole. It's actually going northwest. And going over the Middle East actually adds significant distance and therefore significant additional flying and therefore significant additional CO2. Every ton of kerosene that is burnt develops 3.154 tons of CO2. So it's a 3-to-1 ratio. And by adding to the distance that people need to fly, you're actually making the global CO2 issue worse rather than better. The industry is facing up to this. I believe that the industry needs to demonstrate that it is capable of addressing its environmental performance. The industry has come together. It's probably unique in that it's the only industry in the world that has collectively come together to set standards for CO2 emissions. We intend to improve fuel efficiency by 1.5% per annum from 2010 to 2020, carbon neutral growth from 2020, and a reduction of 50% in our net emissions. Now this is net. I'm not trying to cod people and say that this will be gross. So emissions can, through changes in technology, certainly be improved. But to get to that target of a 50% reduction in net emissions, we will require some form of economic measure, carbon trading, which is my preference. So we have what's known as a 4-pillar strategy to improve our performance. The first is to make what we do today better, to do it in a way that is better. Excuse me. So to improve our efficiency, and we believe that that can improve by about 6%. The second one is to use technology and enhances in technology where we have existing aircraft to modify them. So the addition of winglets, which reduces aerodynamic drag, and anything you can do to reduce aerodynamic drag will reduce fuel burn. You reduce fuel burn, you reduce CO2 emissions. And accelerate fleet replacement. Also, we believe that biofuels can play a role here, and this could improve our efficiency by over 30%. Infrastructure. We have a crazy situation where in Europe we have multiple air traffic control centres and multiple air traffic control organisations, 38 of them in Europe compared to 1 in the US. We have 38 of them because it's a political issue. Europe has a concept called the single European sky. It's to create a single coordinated sky. So today we're often forced to fly extended distances because of political reasons. The technology would allow us to fly directly from point A to point B. This concept of a single European sky was first talked about before I was born. It's making very little progress. There's no technological impediment to this. It's merely a political issue. If we could introduce a single European sky, it's estimated that fuel and CO2 emissions could be reduced by 12%. 12%, that's a huge reduction in CO2 emissions, and that could be achieved through political will. And finally, economic measures. We believe that there should be incentives to improve your performance, and where you can't improve your performance, there should be incentives to others to improve their performance. We will rely on kerosene or at least some element of carbon-based kerosene for some considerable time, although biofuels, I think, will represent an opportunity for us. So what are we doing? Well, I don't know if anybody in the audience wants to have a guess at what that might be. It's an engine. Well done. It's actually a Rolls-Royce Trent 1000 engine, and I'll tell you why I'm talking about this in a moment. This is built by Rolls here in the UK in Derby. It produces 68,000 pounds of thrust. I started flying as a pilot in 1980. The engines on the 737 that I flew developed 11,500 pounds of thrust. This is 68,000. It burns less fuel developing 68,000 pounds of thrust than the engine that was on my 737 back in the early 80s. When it's operating, the fan blades that you can see there are rotating at about 2,700 RPM. The tips of the blades are moving at about 900 miles per hour. This engine is about 3 decibels quieter at takeoff compared to the engines that it will replace. And 3 decibel reduction in noise represents about a 50% reduction in the noise energy produced by an aircraft. And the reason I'm so proud about it is this is the first of British Airways Boeing 787-8. It landed at Heathrow at 7 minutes past 12 today. It was 3 years late, so we typically have a better on-time performance than that. And that's me to prove. That's where you can see I'm wearing the same tie. 3 years on. This aircraft is 25% more efficient in terms of fuel burn than the aircraft that it will replace, the Boeing 767. In terms of noise energy, it's 50% more efficient. This is part of our commitment to improving our environmental performance. It's clearly part of our commitment to improving our financial performance, because anything we can do to reduce our fuel burn clearly reduces our costs. And anything we can do to reduce our fuel burn reduces our CO2 emissions as well. One of the other things we're very proud about at British Airways, and I know Colin would be particularly proud about this as well, is our partnership with a US bioenergy firm called Solena. We call this Green Skies London, where we're intending to build a plant. In fact, it's progressing significantly as we speak, that will convert urban waste into a sustainable biofuel. We believe this plant can use up to 500,000 tons of urban waste that otherwise would have gone into landfill. We're using advanced gasification process, so it's not incineration. This is technology actually that's been around since the 60s. And combine that with Fischer-Tropsch, which has been around since the 40s. So combining two very old and established technologies to get a solution to a very modern problem. And this will produce about 50,000 tons of sustainable low carbon. We're measuring the life cycle CO2, so it's not just the CO2 that's produced. We're looking at the life cycle, from literally the start of production, which would include the transport of the waste into the plant and the transport of the end product into the airport. Steam produced by this will generate electricity. We expect it to be producing oil in 2015. It represents a $500 million commitment on the part of British Airways, because what we've done is we've put our money where our mouth is. This is technology that exists, but what it needs is somebody that's prepared to turn a great idea on paper into something that can work commercially. And the only reason it hasn't been done before is because the people that had this technology could not get anybody to buy the product. So we're investing in the plant. We'll be a shareholder in the plant. But our big commitment is, we're committing to take everything that it can produce. That's allowed Solena to go and get the financing that's required to build this plant. It will employ about 1,200 people. So it's a job creation as well. It clearly cuts down on imported oils as well. So we'll have a benefit in terms of our balance of trade as a country as well. Now, people say, how do you get waste to fuel? And that's how you do it. It's very simple, actually. So if you want to know, you can see from the diagram here how we take urban waste that would have gone into landfill. Landfill, as you know, would have created methane. So this has the positive effect of reducing methane, which is a global warming gas as well. So it's not only about CO2, it's about methane. It also produces a cleaner fuel. So it has significant additional benefits. But it's very simple technology. Clearly the plant will look a little bit more complex than that. But we believe that this is part of the solution. The amount of fuel this will produce is not significant in the overall scale of things. It will produce sufficient fuel to power every aircraft operating at London City, not just the British Airways aircraft, but it would be enough to provide fuel for all of the flying activity at London City Airport. And clearly the location of this plant would be convenient for London City Airport. Now, the final issue I want to talk about before I wrap up is air passenger duty. Air passenger duty in the UK is the highest aviation tax in the world. Some people say, well, you should pay it because you don't pay VAT and you don't pay duty on your fuel. But the truth of it is, if you applied those solely to the UK, you could avoid those by tankering fuel in and out of the UK, which would have a negative effect in terms of environmental performance. This year, it'll be over 3 billion in terms of air passenger duty, rising to about 3.6 billion. We believe this is undermining our industry. It is a significant drag, not just on the airline industry, but also on the UK economy. It's one of the big issues, in addition to visas, that people raise with me when I'm traveling around the world. And although the airline industry went through a bit of recession, it recovered in 2010. The only markets in Europe that didn't recover were the UK, Greece and Ireland. And I think you can understand why Greece and Ireland didn't recover. But you may be surprised to know that the UK suffered the highest percentage traffic loss in absolute terms, and the highest passenger numbers in loss in passenger terms, 7.4 million, a 3.3% reduction, at the same time as the rest of Europe grew by 4.6%. So we are losing out in the UK. Holland, Denmark and Norway abolished their aviation taxes. Holland's a very interesting one. They introduced a tax in 2008 designed to generate 350 million euros of tax revenues. They did the smart thing, and at the end of 2008 they realized that they'd only raised 312 million, so they wondered where the rest of the money went to. And what they discovered is that people were driving to other countries to avoid paying the tax and flying out of other countries rather than flying out of the Netherlands. And when they looked at the impact on their economy, they estimated that it had hit them by 1.2 billion euros. So although they raised 312 million, they had a hit to their economy of 1.2 billion, and they therefore scrapped their duty after 1 year. And if you look at the combination of APD and visa, shows that we're losing out significantly on Chinese tourists. Last year it's estimated that just under 200,000 visas were issued by the embassy, the British Embassy in China, compared to 1.1 million visas issued by Schengen embassies of the Schengen countries. And with a Schengen visa you can travel to 26 countries in Europe. It's costs less than the price of a UK visa. It's easier to get. And what we're seeing now is that people who would want to visit this country to spend money here, to support jobs, to invest in this country, are saying, well, why should I, when it's cheaper, easier for me to go elsewhere in Europe? And this is a real threat to the UK economy. So finally, we've got an industry that is facing challenges all the time, but an industry that's been able to overcome significant challenge, particularly the challenge of high fuel costs. We've seen structural change as a result of that. It's clear that this is an industry that must address its environmental performance. It's not good enough that we talk about addressing it. We need to take action to address it. And we are taking serious action to improve our performance. It can be improved through a combination of measures. Do what we do better, more efficiently. Improve our performance through investment in new technology. Modify aircraft to ensure that they are the most efficient that we can get. Introduce single European sky and advanced ATC systems in America. The industry is also challenged by political mistakes. I believe it was a mistake to cancel the third runway at Heathrow. I'm not going to campaign for one, because politically I don't think it's going to be possible. So I think Lord Davis will do a fantastic job with his report, but I think that's a report that will just sit on the shelf somewhere like many other Commission reports have done in the past. It's an industry here in the UK that faces challenges as a result of high taxation. And I believe that air passenger duty, in the interests of the UK economy, and yes, selfishly, in the interests of my business, but I think air passenger duty should be scrapped. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of my presentation. I have made clear that I enjoy taking questions. I'm happy to take questions on any issues. It doesn't have to be what I showed you here. I'm a Liverpool supporter, so we can talk about football. I've no political affiliation or allegiance, so I'm happy to talk about politics and give my views on that. And anybody that wants to know the truth about Michael O'Leary, please ask away. Thank you very much.
Willie, thank you very much for that address. And before we thank you formally, Willie has said that he'll take questions. So we will spend a short time with questions because we want time for all of you to be able to mingle outside. And just to make sure that you know who I am and I'm not just someone that's whipped in off the street, it's Philip Dew, the Vice Master. And I'm going to just say before we take any questions, I want to thank Willie because it's one of the few times I've seen someone put a map of the world on an overhead and put New Zealand in its right place down here in the corner. The greatest rugby playing country in the world. But it's not...
Says the man from New Zealand. So, please.
The most interesting part for me of the talk was in the structural change.
No, I think it's structural for the reason in that we're traditionally an industry with very high fixed costs. So if you think back to 2001, tragic events after 9/11, back then fuel was $24.70 a barrel, and it represented 13% of the industry's cost base. And what you found there was when demand had fallen significantly as people stopped flying, airlines were encouraged, because they had high fixed costs, to keep flying. So we had a lot of aircraft flying around the world, half full. In some cases less than half full, 40%. I was running Aer Lingus at the time, and the transatlantic operation for Aer Lingus represented about 40% of Aer Lingus's revenues and more than 50% of the profitability. It disappeared overnight. And yet we continued to fly aircraft because we had these very expensive aircraft, very expensive fixed costs, and the argument was you were making a contribution to those fixed costs. The big change now is fuel at 33% of the cost base has changed the industry because it's now much higher variable costs. And airlines have become more efficient and have more variable costs, which means that in times of weak demand, it's easier for airlines to take decisions about removing capacity from the industry. And that has made a big difference because you don't have a big disconnect between supply and demand. And if you look at the low-cost carriers, so Ryanair, my good friend Michael, if he was here, would tell you that it's been a real change for him. So in the winter period, which is traditionally in Europe a weak demand period, we have very significant seasonality. Ryanair had 80 of their 290 aircraft grounded in airports around Europe, airports you would never heard of. These are new airports that he will try and get you to fly to at some point in the future. It was costing him nothing to park his aircraft. He has variable crew costs, variable labour costs, and because fuel for him is about 50% of his cost base, it was an easy decision for him to say, I'm not going to fly these aircraft because there's no demand. In the past he would have. And particularly, Ryanair, the lowest cost provider, you could argue that they should have kept going. So what we've seen is a greater match of demand to capacity because the cost structure of the industry has changed significantly. So in a strange way, high oil prices has actually been beneficial to the industry. What has challenged us is adapting to the change in the oil price. So that huge ramp up in oil prices in 2008 was very painful because we couldn't adapt our capacity and our prices quickly enough. But since then, we've become much more efficient as an industry in adapting capacity. That is the most significant change that the industry has seen, and that is structural. And I think that sort of behavior, even if oil were to fall to, $20 a barrel, which I don't think we'll ever see, I think you'll see that the industry will behave in a much more rational way than the industry behaved previously. So it's been a big change, and that's why I think the dynamics are structural. It's a structural change in the dynamics in the industry, which should over time lead to a more profitable industry and an industry that can generate returns in excess of our cost of capital.
Thank you. I think there are two down here, and let's go here. Yes.
I was wondering about sort of the internal workings of IAG and particularly your decision-making processes from your presentation.
It's a great question. Personally, I'm more intuitive than analytical. And I'll give you a great example of how analysis can actually lead you to the wrong conclusion. When I was running Aer Lingus back in 2001, we had a situation whereby our markets had collapsed. So we had these expensive aircraft, as I said, and we had to fly them somewhere. So my chief commercial officer came to me and he said, look, we've got too much capacity in Italy. We're going to have to take aircraft out of Italy. And I said, well, you've got to use them somewhere, so where are you going to send them? So he said, I'll be back in half an hour. He came back to me and he said, what about flying to Malaga, Dublin to Malaga? I said, great. So 14th of November 2001, we announced that we were going to start flights to Malaga. Everybody said, we're mad. You don't do things like that. We started flying 14th of December 2001 to Malaga. About 9 months after we had done that, this guy came into my office with a tome and presented it to me, and he said, this is the route analysis of the Dublin-Malaga route. I said, oh, very interesting. I said, I'm not going to read all of that, so, what does it say? Well, he said, it's very clear, we shouldn't do it. I said, okay. I said, how is the route performing? And he said, well, I haven't looked at that. I said, well, so you're saying on the basis of your analysis we shouldn't do it, but you haven't checked to see how it's performing? And he said, well, that's not my job. So I said, okay, did you do this on your own? He said, no, I had my team do it. So I said, bring your team in. So the team came in very proudly to see the CEO to receive, thanks and plaudits for their performance. And I said to them, I said, guys, did you ever think of looking how it was actually performing? It was the most profitable route we were operating. We went from, we started with 3 flights a week on a 737. Within a year, we were flying daily flights, and we were using Airbus A330s at the weekend to supplement 737s. It was the most profitable route we had, and yet the analysis said, don't do it because you're going to lose a fortune. So in my time as CEO, I was there for just over 3 years as CEO, we set ourselves a target of launching a new destination every month. And we launched one every month that I was there. We did all of that without any analysis. We said, let's make some mistakes along the way. All of the new destinations we started were working for us. Now, I'm not suggesting you give up your study and just go out there and decide you're going to do things. I think analysis has a place in life. So we have a combination of analytical resources who will do the analysis. But the key issue, if you're involved in analysis, test it. Check it against the reality. A famous Irish Prime Minister, Gareth Fitzgerald, who was an economist, I don't know if there are economists in the world, but I do like, I think it was George Bernard Shaw who said, if all of the economists in the world were laid end to end, they would not reach a conclusion. But Gareth Fitzgerald famously said in Parliament in Dublin, he said, look, I know it works in reality, but does it work in theory? So, you've got to be careful. The theory may tell you something, the reality may tell you something completely different. Test it, challenge yourself. So don't just rely on analysis. A lot of people will know what's right. So test it against what you do and challenge the analysis, make sure that it's right.
Yes, and then, yes, got it. Yep.
Yes. How does IAG use tax haven in your business? We all know that in FTSE 100, only two companies that's not.
No, IAG actually, it's interesting, and Alistair Osborne, who's, I think he's business editor with The Telegraph, was convinced that we had established this company in Spain for some tax purposes. To be honest, our point of establishment is irrelevant because we pay tax on the revenue generating unit. So British Airways pays tax in the UK, Iberia pays tax in Spain, and that's the way the airline industry operates. So, you know, BA pays its tax in the UK, Iberia pays its tax in Spain. The fact that IAG is registered in Spain has no impact on that whatsoever. So there's no benefit. And I'll be honest, we did look, you know, we did consider whether as a business there were opportunities for us to structure the business differently. But because of the nature of our business, that BA, it wouldn't matter where we established IAG, you know, Cayman Islands, you name it, BA would end up paying tax in the UK, and that's what happens. So we are a taxpayer in the UK through British Airways, we are a taxpayer in Spain through Iberia, we are a taxpayer in Spain through Vueling, and there's no tax haven involved in it.
Yes.
Thank you very much. If I may say, I've learned a lot, so thank you very much.
No, it was very simple. It was about slots at Heathrow. BMI was a significant loss-making company from memory, in 2011, its last full year of operation. It had a turnover of about 920 million, and it lost about 200 million on a turnover of 900 million. So it had not been profitable for many years. It was a great airline, but it had not been profitable. We acquired it because it had a significant portfolio of slots at Heathrow, and our interest was in acquiring slots to enable us to expand our network in the absence of a third runway at Heathrow. We wanted to have access to slots that would enable us to use these new aircraft that we purchased, 787s, to expand the network, particularly into destinations in Asia. So since we've acquired it, the net benefit to British Airways was 42 additional slots at Heathrow. A slot is a takeoff or a landing. So we've got 42 slot pairs, so 42 takeoffs, 42 landings. And we would intend over the next couple of years to use about a third of those, about 14 or 15 of those slots, to expand our long-haul network. So the first of those was the commencement of flying to Seoul in Korea last December. The second will be Chengdu in Sichuan province in China in September of this year. And as we take delivery of more new aircraft, we will start expanding the long-haul network, primarily into points in Asia with an emphasis on China. We don't fly to many, we don't fly to Vietnam, we don't fly to Indonesia, we fly to 5 points in India. These are markets that I will argue are critical for UK trade going forward. And the only way we can get connectivity to these points was to acquire additional slots at Heathrow.
We'll take one more, and it's, yes.
It's more an observation than anything, but you discussed the importance of Heathrow as a hub, and I think it's important.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to try and sell a third runway. As I said, I don't believe politically it's possible. I did campaign for it, but with the decision in 2010 of the coalition government to cancel it, I accept that decision. I will continue to say that I think it was wrong. And I love telling politicians that I think they made the wrong decision. It's actually one of the advantages of being called in front of select committees in Parliament, that you get to not just answer their questions, but actually to tell them a few things as well. So I think it was the wrong decision. I think it was the wrong decision for the UK economy. But the decision has been taken, and I live with that. Interestingly, because we use Heathrow a lot, people in this room probably have flown out of Heathrow on a regular occasion. I know I do. We tend to be a bit harsh on Heathrow. Terminal 5 is ranked as the best airport terminal in the world. For the last 2 years running, it's through a survey by a company called Skytrax, who poll 11 million international passengers. Heathrow ranks number 1 in the world. Terminal 5 ranks number 1 in the world in terms of the best airport terminal. Heathrow is now ranked at number 10 in the world. Now, the places you mentioned are ranked above it. Dubai not, actually, interestingly, because the customer experience for a lot of people in Dubai can be quite torturous, and particularly with the way it has expanded. But yes, there are hubs that are better than Heathrow. But actually, Heathrow is not that bad. It has been bad in the past. In fact, it was dreadful in the the middle of the last decade, 2005, 6, 7, because it was not built to handle the number of passengers that it was using. But it is not a bad airport. It's a very efficient airport in terms of how it operates, but it is full. And the truth of the matter is, the UK economy needs an efficient hub airport. It has the most efficient hub airport, but it's full. And therefore, we're pretty much at a limit. The only way you'll get an increase in the number of passengers is through larger gauge of aircraft. And that's one of the things that we will be doing. But, I've been to a lot of airports around the world. And let me tell you, some of these airports that you have yet to experience are dreadful. And Heathrow, yes, it has its failings. Customer service could certainly be better. But, I think we should recognise it is important to the UK economy. And actually, relative to many of the airports in the world, it's not the worst airport you could see. And by the way, I don't like the people who run Heathrow Airport, but I do have to be fair and honest sometimes about them. So.
Okay, now it's our time to thank Willie formally, and tonight we have just seen the culmination in what the themes have been all week. We have had the themes of resilience and sustainability, and tonight we've seen examples of how you take an organisation and it is both resilient and it is both attempting to be sustainable and contribute to the wider economy. And resilience is an interesting concept because organisational psychologists have been exploring it for years. First as the concept of hardiness, and now as not just the ideas of bouncing back, but attempting to understand the qualities that come with resilience and how those qualities can not only be in the people in the organisation, but in the organisation itself. And of course, there's a dark side to this as well. So there has been studies looking at crisis incubation. And I think that we have seen tonight that when someone comes in with 400 pages of analysis, then you already are in some form of beginnings of a crisis incubation. And it's just been an example of the themes that we've been interested in, the themes that we build into what we do here at Birkbeck, and more importantly, all this acknowledges the work of Lord Marshall. It just simply is a reflection of his contribution to the airline, of his contribution to the city that he loved, London, and more importantly for us, to his contribution to Birkbeck and George Birkbeck's 1823 mission of universal access to the blessings of knowledge. Willie, we thank you, and I think the best way to thank you tonight is to end in a truly British Airways fashion. So, we are very grateful that you are all here tonight with us, and we thank you for being here. We also wish that if this is not your final destination, and we would hope that this is your final destination because enrolments are still open, then we would wish you a safe journey to your final destination, and finally, we hope to see you all here again very soon. Willie, thank you.